I'm not seeing it. All right, we'll just leave it here for now. Well, Emma, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Julia. I think I've been on some of the emails with you. Danielle is over here.
Hi, Danielle.
And then Cool Book Club is here. We just finished our first course, which was a sausage roll, which was super delicious. And we have rabbit stew ahead and some cheesecake also.
Wow.
Yes.
That sounds amazing.
Very excited about the food. So we've only just gotten into our discussion a little bit, but we do have a lot of questions for you. And again, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I wanted to start with, it seems like the book really hinges around the slua.
Yeah.
How would you? Okay. So we're wondering how you discovered this like folklore item from Scotland, and whether that came first or like the rest of the story, I guess.
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so I did my undergraduate degree in Scotland. I was at the University of St. Andrews for my undergraduate degree. And I knew that I wanted to write something set in Scotland and drawing on Scottish folklore. So the slua came first for the story. I had always been interested in sort of light speculative fiction, or speculative fiction that's about sort of like our world but not. So I was interested in incorporating mythology and folklore. So I went looking for a bit of folklore that sort of got my brain going. And I can't remember now actually exactly how I found the slua specifically, but it was born from that seed of being really interested in sort of capturing the landscape and the history that I was immersed in as a student at St. Andrews.
Okay. How did you land on the time it was in? Like the post World War II is one that's not so usually World War II novels are during the war. And you even have like, I guess, the interwar novels as well. But post World War II, I feel like is a little less done. How did you decide on that time frame?
Yeah, well, early drafts, or the first sort of iteration of the book was not set in that time period. I was quite vague about when it was set. It was the 20th century, but like I wasn't specific about when it was. It was really vague. And as I was working through, that very early version of the story, I realized that especially with the various sort of thematic resonances of the myth that I was using, there wasn't really a good way or like a doable way of maintaining that vagueness, because that's, a reader would always be looking at this and being like, okay, but like this is really about the First World War. Okay, but this is really about the Second World War. This is really about et cetera, et cetera. So I realized that I had to, not be so coy about time period. And I've always been really interested in the Second World War, but I felt that especially with the myth of the Slúach and sort of what they represent in folklore, it made more sense for it to be sort of an aftermath novel than a during novel. So having decided that I was interested in World War II already, I then, as I started playing with that time period, realized that it actually had a lot of, beyond being a period of history that I'm quite interested in, it had a lot of really interesting, I thought, sort of metaphoric parallels with just even the image of the Slúach. I really liked the idea of the parallel between the hordes of birds and the bomber stream that Ian would have flown in. So there were a lot of things like that I found really interesting about that period, just as from a sort of creative level. And it also, I think, I was interested in with the island exploring, this very small community that's sort of gone really abruptly from being very traditional, very insular, very sort of protected, being sort of drawn into this hyper modern world really quickly, and sort of having a bit of whiplash from that. So I felt like that immediate post-war period really let me, first of all, it just made sense, I thought, with the myth. And then it really let me explore those things that I was interested in. Yeah.
Excellent. You mentioned that the folklore of the Sluag, and it's very alluded to, I guess, in the book. I mean, what would you say is, if you didn't know any Scottish folklore going into it, like you mentioned, like it made sense to set it post-war. Like what do they represent, or is that something?
Right.
I mean, I think we know from having read the book, but I wasn't familiar with Scottish folklore at all. So I'm just curious if they're like, what is their significance usually in a story?
Yeah, so the Sluach are they're part of they're one iteration. The Scottish version is sort of one iteration of what's called a folklore motif, and it recurs across most, if not all, Northern and Western European folklores, certainly across all the Celtic folklores, and Norse as well. So in Norse mythology, the equivalent is the Valkyrie. So, the sort of core bit of the myth that never really changes between cultures is this swarm of, usually they're considered like the souls of, like unforgiven sinners, or in Norse mythology, the Valkyrie, who sort of ride across the landscape, and collect other lost souls for this wild hunt. And that's the name of the motif. That's where the title of the book comes from. So I thought that, and they're often considered to be, a harbinger, or a harbinger of doom, this really, really associated with grief and mourning, and also this idea of aftermath. So those were the sort of seeds in the folkloric research that I did, that I thought resonated really well with that post-war period.
Got it. Okay, so I went off script a little bit on those last two questions, but so Lee's life can be split into like before or during Anya and after Anya. And Danielle looked up the name. Anya means radiance, associated with midsummer and the sun, which of course is juxtaposed with the moody and dark atmosphere of the island when we're introduced to it. How did you like happenstance upon the name, or did you like find, I guess the question is like, which came first, the name or
the name came first, actually. I think I did know that that's what Anya means, but that wasn't front of mind when I named that character. Actually, one of my friends pointed out to me just a couple weeks ago that most of the surnames, or many of the surnames for the Islanders, are just my friends from uni's surnames, because that's when I started drafting it. And Anya actually is she, at the time that I started writing, was just an acquaintance, and that was quite a good friend. So I just really liked her name and took it. And which happened with a lot of my names. I was drafting, and I would just put something in early drafts, sort of as placeholders, and then you get far enough in that's just the name. So it worked out quite well with Anya that I happened to just like the name, and then it had this sort of greater literary Easter egg element to it. I can't really take credit for that, but I'm quite pleased with how that worked out.
Yeah, no kidding. That was really good. The happenstance.
Yeah. Subconscious was doing things for me.
Right. Well, and then once you figure out what it is, why change it, obviously. Yeah. So you said you do like World War II a lot. Did you have to do a lot of additional research for the book before you, I guess, did the finishing touches? And
yeah, I did. I did a lot of research. I feel quite strongly that when you're working with sort of speculative fiction, the bits that are real have to really feel real, or the bits that are sort of, more tied to reality. I really wanted to make sure that the war elements felt sort of tangible and real, and really grounded in fact, because I thought that it would then be easier to convince a reader to sort of come with me on this wild ride of throwing in this folklore. So I did a lot of research that didn't end up making it into the book, much to my chagrin, because I didn't add anything at that point. But I spent a lot of time with primary sources at the National Archives just outside London, RAF archives, to sort of piece together Ian's War, and that was sort of the most significant resource that I used. All of these, I sort of just chose a couple RAF squadrons and read through basically all 6 years of their logbooks and sort of pieced together a structure for Ian's War. So everything that happens to Ian in his war is drawn from a real event. None of that's really it didn't all happen to the same person, and I've changed some of the details. But all of the things that he remembers happening, like bailing out and walking over the Pyrenees into Spain, and finding his own way home out of being a prisoner of war, that's a real story. There were more instances like that that ended up getting cut. But there was a lot of care went into making sure that his war was realistic. So that was the main element of war research that I did. That was sort of the farthest outside of my sort of comfort zone. But it was really important to me to get those details right, and grounded in reality. So yeah, I'm always quite pleased when people ask me about the research because of how much it got cut. But yeah.
You said some of it didn't get to, and what was the most interesting thing you found that didn't make it into the book?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the thing that I was most determined to keep in there was Ian's sort of bailout capture story. So I cut a lot of other stuff to make sure that could stay in, because that was the bit that I thought was the most interesting. But I had more bits about his training and the experience of the sort of constant turnover of air crew, especially bomber crews. And so, the experience of, you get to this base, someone trains you, they seem like they really know what they're doing, and a week later they're gone, just because the odds were so bad. So it was sort of a lot more of that, just that sort of, becoming a statistic feeling. But I had really wonderful editorial advice from both my agents and my editor, Maisie. So I think that everything that got cut was the right stuff to cut. The most interesting bits did stay in.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so, maybe on that regard, I think that Danielle read in another interview that you said that the first draft was very different from the current book. Can you tell us a little bit about, what changed and how long you were working on it?
Yeah, so I from the time that I started working on it till when it was published was about 5 years. And the the biggest difference is that the first draft had no plot. Nothing happened. I always say my first drafts are all vibes and no plot. The mood is great, but nothing happens. Plot is the thing that I find hardest about writing, so it's always the sort of the last thing for me. So yeah, the big difference is that stuff actually happens in this book. And in the first draft, it was just a lot of sort of ambiance and people being sad, and now there's actually, something happening.
Okay, that's fair. You do sometimes do both, yes. Okay, so we do like to do this. We haven't been able to do it ourselves yet because we got started a little late. But if you were able to cast the main characters, Ian and Lee, who would you choose to play them in an adaptation of the book?
Yeah, it's a really hard question. I'm a literature student. I find adaptation fascinating as a concept, and so I feel like my answer is sort of colored by that. And my answer is usually, because I've been asked this before, and it's usually that I'd be most excited to see people that I didn't know, actors that I didn't know. cast in these roles. And I'm not the kind of writer where like I picture someone as I'm writing. I didn't sort of have my own sort of face cast for my characters in mind, which also makes it hard. So I think my answer is really boring, and I think it's that I would be really excited to see some unknown actors, some unknown Scottish actors in these parts.
You'd like to see some big folks get in there and like prove their mettle. Okay.
Yeah. I think it's so exciting to watch a show or a movie and see someone that you've never seen before, and that you don't have, sort of all of the trappings of celebrity that come along with acting so much now, where you sort of know the actor, and so bring that context into watching their roles. And so I think it's quite exciting to see someone new. So that would be really cool for me.
Yeah. Okay, so I do have an audience question, and I'm going to remind you guys, I'm going to turn to you guys after this question. Okay, so we have at least one that we're going to add to this, but we had in our initial discussion, the resolution of the book sort of leaves us open-ended. Did you see a specific, like, did people stay on the island? Were the Sluag still a problem, or did this, whole ordeal resolve them? Did you envision that going onward, or did you want to leave it all to the readers?
Well, I feel really strongly that a book belongs to its readers, and it doesn't really matter. Well, it might be interesting what I think, but what matters is what's on the page. And I quite like excuse me, I can't speak. It's late over here, and I've used up all my mouth dexterity for the day. I quite like an ambiguous ending. So it was purposefully ambiguous. I have, my own opinion as to what happens. And I'm happy to tell you if you want to know, but I wouldn't want to, sort of suggest that is the right interpretation of the ending, because I think it is, part of what I wanted to leave the reader with is this idea of, they don't know what's going to happen. And there's an element of having to sort of become comfortable with that ambiguity. But I foresee generally that, the Sluagh have been there forever. They aren't going to be completely gone, but they've been this sort of fiercer presence that is sort of being fed into by, the inability to sort of grieve productively. So, I think it sort of is ambiguous in that it sort of depends on what the people of the book decide to do after the book. And that's not something that I really spend that much time thinking about. But I think it's certainly open to be, things can get better if people try. And that's probably also not a very satisfying answer, but I'm reluctant to tie it down much more.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah. I just have a question about her writing.
Yeah, sure.
So you kind of mentioned a couple of things that sort of answer my question, but I'm always curious about a writer's process.
Mm-hmm.
And so you said that it was 5 years, and you said that plot is hard for you and comes last. So I wondered, are you like an outliner? Are you a composition book writer? Are you just a stream of consciousness Virginia Woolf? What does it look like for you?
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, I have recently been forced to become an outliner. I've been assigned the task of outlining. But I used to I would outline quite vaguely. Like I'd have a general sort of shape of what I was thinking would happen. And then I just sort of go for it and sort of see what came out. And that's part of why, the book took so long. So it was about, 3.5 years of sort of working that way. And then when I signed with my agents, they had me do a really detailed outline for a rewrite. And then, so I did that really detailed outline, and then I wrote from that outline. And that's where the current iteration of the book comes from. So I'm now, as I'm moving forward into other projects, when I, told my agents what I was thinking of working on next, they're like, that sounds great, but will you please write an outline first this time so you don't spend another 3 years just sort of like dancing around the plot instead of actually having one. So now I'm working from a really detailed outline right from the beginning. It's quite a new experience for me, but I think it's better cutting out some of the extra faffing about time.
Yeah.
Yes. Hello.
Hi.
My question was more of like an observation. I'm just curious if that's kind of what you're going for. But the location, the setting of the story, it's a very isolated island, which I love. And I was just curious because it seems like they have a parallel of the people of this island. They're disconnected with the outside world, and whenever they do leave, they don't come back. So I was just curious if there's a parallel between the people of this island and the lost souls, because they themselves seem lost. They seem kind of stuck in this kind of limbo, kind of like the lost souls that the crows are trying to carry on to the next place. I was wondering if that was your goal, or if that's just kind of how it played out.
Hear that? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great observation. I don't know that I thought about it as explicitly being that parallel, but I think it was all, there were a lot of reasons that I wanted to be set in a really isolated place, and one of them was this feeling of, having this really tight-knit community that doesn't change, except for when it does. And so when it does change, it's quite sort of a cataclysmic event, whether that is from people moving, or people going to war, or the people who passed away on the island. Sort of all of those are part of the same feeling of this really sort of ground shaking change to the community. So I think I really like that parallel. I'm not sure that I was thinking of it that explicitly, but I definitely see it there for sure, and that all was sort of part of the sort of soup that made up what I was thinking about when I was setting the story where I did.
Any other audience questions? Yeah.
Teeny tiny one. Is the dog's name an ode to your?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a fun coincidence. The dog has always been named Maisie. The dog named Maisie was in there from the very first time I set my fingers to my keyboard. So we had quite a lot of fun with that over at Tin House when after they bought the book. Yeah, it was just a fun coincidence.
That was good, yeah. Okay, we have two final questions. I'll call you guys. Okay.
So yeah, we like to close out the interviews always with these, which are, what are your favorite books that you've read recently that you would recommend?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my favorite books are, I have sort of two that are my ultimate favorite sort of contemporary novels, and one is Emily St. John Mandel's Station 11, which has become, I wrote my undergrad dissertation on Station 11, so I feel quite like I was an early adopter. It's become less of like a good recommendation because everyone's read it now, but it is a great book. And then one that actually had a huge influence on my work is Kate Atkinson's Life After Life, and then the companion novel God in Ruins, which are her Second World War novels, which are just, sort of virtuosic, I think, in their she's a great example of being able to get that sort of granular, fact-based reality feeling out of historical fiction. So I think they're quite masterful. And then my most recent read that I really loved was Julia Armfield's Our Wives Under the Sea. Just came out this year. It's really fantastic. It's a sort of gothic. I think it's been pitched as being a horror novel, but it's not actually very scary. And I'm the biggest scaredy cat in the world. So if I say it's not scary, then it definitely isn't. And it's quite, beautifully written. Would highly recommend that one as well.
Okay. And then can you tell us what you're working on next, if anything?
Yeah, I'm working. I'm very slowly picking away at my next book. It is, I described it to my friend sort of tongue-in-cheekly as Help, I Live in a Haunted House and the Ghosts Have Unionized, which is a little bit more lighthearted than the actual vibe of the book, but it's sort of the gist of it. But it's set in 1970s London, and is, sort of at its most basic about a haunted house in Hampstead Heath. So I'm still, we're still in the all vibes, less plot stage. It's not no plot because I have to do that outline, but we're still in the vibey bit of it. But that's
Sometimes you need the vibes to really get the, get going, I think.
Yeah. For sure.
I love that all vibes, no plot. I feel like I'm gonna use that to describe things from now on.
Yeah, you can have that one.
Okay, you guys, any final things to offer?
Well, Emma, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's really late there. It's like 12:30, right? So we really appreciate you joining us.
It's past my bedtime.
Quite, it's quite late, yes. So we really appreciate your joining us tonight, so late, and thank you so much. We really enjoyed discussing the book, and we still have a good bit left to a good bit left to discuss and eat, and we're very excited about it. And thank you so much.
Yay. And thank you so much.
All you have to do to leave is just exit out of the screen. It's very confusing, but if you just close it, then you're good. And thank you.
Great.
We will hopefully see your books in the catalog soon.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Enjoy the rest of your meal and your discussion, and I hope you guys have a great night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Bye. Oh man, sorry, you guys. We thought that the speaker would be a little louder, but I'm not sure. There's always technical things that happen.